Chapter 5, Part 2 of Melmoth the Wanderer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin, Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Robert Maturin. Chapter 5, Part 2. This prostration, so unexpected, so revolting, and so like the monastic habit of artificial humiliation, completely annihilated the effect of his language. I retreated from his arms, which were extended towards me. "My father, I will never become a monk." "Wretch! And you refuse then to listen to the call of your conscience, the adjuration of your parents, and the voice of God?" The fury with which he uttered these words, the change from a ministering angel to an infuriated and menacing demon, had an effect just contrary to what he expected. I said calmly, "My conscience does not reproach me. I have never disobeyed its calls. My parents have adjured me only through your mouth, and I hope, for their sakes, the organ has not been inspired by them. And the voice of God, echoed from my own heart, bids me not to obey you, by adulterating his service with prostituted vows." As I spoke thus, the director changed the whole character of his figure, his attitude, and his language. From the extreme supplication or of terror, he passed in a moment, with the facility of an actor, to a rigid and breathless sternness. His figure rose from the ground before me like that of the prophet Samuel before the astonished eyes of Saul. He dropped the dramatist, and was the monk in a moment. "And you will not take the vows?" "I will not, my father." "And you will brave the resentment of your parents, and the denunciation of the church?" "I have done nothing to deserve either." "But you will encounter both, to cherish your horrid resolution of being the enemy of God." "I am not the enemy of God for speaking the truth." "Liar and hypocrite! You blaspheme!" "Stop, my father, these are words unbecoming of your profession, and unsuited to this place. I acknowledge the justice of the rebuke, and submit to it, though uttered by the mouth of a child." And he dropped his hypocritical eyes, folded his hands on his breast, and murmured, "Fiat voluntas tua." My dear child, my zeal for the service of God and the honor of your family, to which I am attached equally by principle and affection, have carried me too far. I confess it. But have I to ask pardon of you also, my child, for a redundance of that affection and zeal for your house, which its descendant has proved itself destitute of? The mingled humiliation and irony of this address had no effect on me. He saw it had not, for after slowly raising his eyes to watch that effect, he saw me standing in silence, not trusting my voice with a word, lest I should utter something rash and disrespectful, not daring to lift up my eyes, lest their expression should speak without making language necessary. I believe the director felt his situation rather critical. His interest in the family depended on it, and he attempted to cover his retreat with all the expertness and fertility of maneuver which belong to an ecclesiastical tactician. "My dear child, we have been both wrong, I from zeal, and you from no matter what. Our business is to exchange forgiveness with each other, and I implore it of God, whom we have both offended. My dear child, let us prostrate ourselves before him, and even while our hearts are glowing with human passion, God may seize that moment to impress the seal of his grace on both, and fix it there for ever. Often the earthquake and the whirlwind are succeeded by the still small voice, and God is there. Let us pray." I fell on my knees, resolved to pray in my heart, but in a short time the fervor of his language, the eloquence and energy of his prayers, dragged me along with him, and I felt myself compelled to pray against every dictate of my own heart. He had reserved this display for the last, and he had judged well. I never heard anything so like inspiration as I listened, and involuntarily, to effusions that seemed to issue from no mortal lips, I began to doubt my own motives, and search my heart. I had disdained his taunts, I had defied and conquered his passion, but as he prayed, I wept. This going over the same ground with the heart is one of the most painful and humiliating of all exercises. The virtue of yesterday becomes the vice of today. We ask with the desponding and restless skepticism of Pilate, what is truth? But the oracle that was so eloquent one moment is dumb the next, or if it answers, it is with that ambiguity that makes us dread we have to consult again, and forever in vain. I was now in a state quite fit for the director's purpose, but he was fatigued with the part he had played with so little success, and took his leave, imploring me to continue my importunities to heaven to direct and enlighten me, while he himself would supplicate all the saints in heaven to touch the hearts of my parents, and reveal to them some means of saving me from the crime and perjury of a forced vocation, without involving themselves in a crime, if possible, of blacker dye and greater magnitude. Saying so, he left me, to urge my parents with all his influence to pursue the most rigorous measures to enforce my adoption of the conventual life. His motives for doing so were sufficiently strong when he visited me, but their strength was increased tenfold before his departure. He had reckoned confidently on the power of his remonstrances. He had been repulsed. The disgrace of such a defeat rankled in the core of his heart. He had been only a partisan in the cause, but he was now a party. What was a matter of conscience before was now a matter of honor with him, and I rather believe that the director laid a greater stress on the latter, or made great havoc of confusion between both in his mind. Be that as it may, I passed a few days after his visit in a state of indescribable excitement. I had something to hope, and that is often better than something to enjoy. The cup of hope always excites thirst. That of fruition disappoints or quenches it. I took long walks in the garden alone. I framed imaginary conversations to myself. The boarders observed me, and said to each other according to their instructions, "He is meditating on his vocation. He is supplicating for illuminating grace. Let us not disturb him." I did not undeceive them, but I reflected with increasing horror on a system that forced hypocrisy to a precocity unparalleled, and made the last vice of life the earliest of conventual youth. But I soon forgot reflection to plunge into reverie. I imagined myself at the palace of my father. I saw him, my mother, and the director engaged in debate. I spoke for each, and felt for all. I supplied the passionate eloquence of the director, his strong representations of my aversion to the habit, his declaration that further importunity on their part would be as impious as it was fruitless. I saw all the impression I once flattered myself I had made on my father revived. I saw my mother yield. I heard the murmur of doubtful acquiescence, the decision, the congratulations. I saw the carriage approaching. I heard the convent doors fly open. Liberty, liberty! I was in their arms. No, I was at their feet. Let those who smile at me ask themselves whether they have been indebted most to imagination or reality for all they have enjoyed in life, if indeed they have ever enjoyed anything. In these internal dramas, however, I always felt that the persons did not speak with the interest I wished, and the speeches I put into their mouths would have been spoken with 10,000 times more animation by myself. Still I felt the most exquisite enjoyment in these reveries, and perhaps it was not diminished by the thought how I was deceiving my companions the whole time. But dissimulation always teaches dissimulation, and the only question is whether we shall be the masters of the art or its victims, a question soon decided by our self-love. It was on the 6th day that I heard, with a beating heart, a carriage stop. I could have sworn to the sound of its wheels. I was in the hall before I was summoned. I felt I could not be in the wrong, nor was I. I drove to my father's palace in a delirium. A vision of repulse and of reconciliation, of gratitude and of despair. I was ushered into a room where were assembled my father, my mother, and the director, all seated and silent as statues. I approached, I kissed their hands, and then I stood at a small distance breathless. My father was the first to break silence, but he spoke very much with the air of a man who was repeating a part dictated to him, and the tone of his voice contradicted every word he prepared to utter. "My son, I have sent for you, no longer to contend with your weak and wicked obstinacy, but to announce to you my own resolution. The will of heaven and of your parents has devoted you to its service, and your resistance can only make us miserable, without in the least frustrating that resolution." At these words, gasping for breath, my lips involuntarily unclosed. My father imagined this was in attempt to reply, though in fact I was not capable of uttering a syllable, and hastened to prevent it. "My son, all opposition in unavailing, all discussion fruitless. Your destiny is decided, and though your struggles may render it wretched, they cannot reverse it. Be reconciled, my child, to the will of heaven and your parents, which you may insult, but cannot violate. This reverend person can better explain to you the necessity of your obedience than I can." And my father, evidently weary of a task which he had reluctantly undertaken, was rising to go away, when the director detained him. "Stay, Signor, and assure your son before you depart that, since I last saw him, I have fulfilled my promise, and urged every topic on your mind, and that of the Duchess, that I thought might operate for his best interests." I was aware of the hypocritical ambiguity of this expression, and, collecting my breath, I said, "Reverend Father, as a son, I seek not to employ an intercessor with my own parents. I stand before them, and if I have not an intercessor in their hearts, your mediation must be ineffectual altogether. I implored you merely to state to them my invincible reluctance. They all interrupted me with exclamations, as they repeated my last words. Reluctance! Invincible! Is it for this you have been admitted to our presence? Is it for this we have borne so long with your contumacy, only to hear it repeated with aggravations? Yes, my father, yes, for this or nothing. If I am not permitted to speak, why am I suffered in your presence? Because we hope to witness your submission. Allow me to give the proofs of it on my knees. And I fell on my knees, hoping that my posture might soften the effect of the words I could not help uttering. I kissed my father's hand, he did not withdraw it, and I felt it tremble. I kissed the skirt of my mother's robe. She attempted to withdraw it with one hand, but with the other she hid her face, and I thought I saw tears bursting through her fingers. I knelt to the director too, and besought his benediction, and struggled, though with revolting lips, to kiss his hand. But he snatched his habit from my hand, elevated his eyes, spread out his fingers, and assumed the attitude of a man who recoils in horror from a being who merits the extreme of malediction and reprobation. Then I felt my only chance was with my parents. I turned to them, but they shrunk from me, and appeared willing to devolve the remainder of the task on the director. He approached me. My child, you have pronounced your reluctance to the life of God invincible, but may there not be things more invincible even to your resolution? The curses of that God, confirmed by those of your parents, and deepened by all the fulminations of the church, whose embraces you have rejected, and whose holiness you have desecrated by that rejection. Father, these are terrible words, but I have no time now but for meanings. Besotted wretch, I do not understand you. You do not understand yourself. Oh, I do, I exclaimed, and turning to my father, still on my knees, I cried, My dear father, is life, human life, all shut up from me? It is, said the director, answering for my father. Have I no resource? None. No profession? Profession, degenerate wretch! Let me embrace the meanest, but do not make me a monk. Profligate is weak. O my father, still calling on my father, let not this man answer for you. Give me a sword, send me into the armies of Spain to seek death. Death is all I ask in preference to that life you doom me to. It is impossible, said my father, gloomily returning from the window against which he had been leaning. The honor of an illustrious family, the dignity of a Spanish grandee. Oh, my father, of how little value that will be when I am consuming in my early grave, and you die broken-hearted on it, over the flower your own voice has doomed to wither there. My father trembled. Signor, I entreat, I command you to retire. This scene will unfit you for the devotional duties you must perform this evening. And you leave me then? I cried as they departed. Yes, yes, repeated the director, leave you burdened with the curse of your father. Oh no, exclaimed my father, but the director had hold of his hand and pressed it strongly. Of your mother, he repeated. I heard my mother weep aloud, and felt it like a repeal of that curse, but she dared not speak, and I could not. The director had now 2 victims in his hands, and a third at his feet. He could not avoid showing his triumph. He paused, collected the full power of his sonorous voice, and thundered forth, "And of God!" And he rushed from the room, accompanied by my father and mother, whose hands he grasped, I felt as if struck by a thunderbolt. The rushing of their robes, as he dragged them out, seemed like the whirlwind that attends the presence of the destroying angel. I cried out in my hopeless agony of destitution, "Oh, that my brother were here to intercede for me!" And as I uttered these words, I fell. My head struck against a marble table, and I sunk on the floor, covered with blood. The domestics, of whom, according to the custom of the Spanish nobility, were about 200 in the palace, found me in this situation. They uttered outcries. Assistance was procured. It was believed that I had attempted to kill myself, but the surgeon who attended me happened to be a man both of science and humanity, and having cut away the long hair clotted with blood, and surveyed the wound, he pronounced it trifling. My mother was of his opinion, for within 3 days I was summoned to her apartment. I obeyed the summons. A black bandage, severe headache, and an unnatural paleness were the only testimonies of my accident, as it was called, and the director had suggested to her that this was the time to fix the impression. How well religious persons understand the secret of making every event of the present world operate on the future, while they pretend to make the future predominant over the present. Were I to outlive the age of man, I should never forget my interview with my mother. She was alone when I entered, and seated with her back to me. I knelt and kissed her hand. My paleness and my submission seemed to affect her, but she struggled with her emotions, overcame them, and said in a cold, dictated tone, "To what purpose are those marks of exterior reverence when your heart disowns them?" "Madam, I am not conscious of that." "Not conscious? How then are you here? How is it that you have not, long before this, spared your father the shame of supplicating his own child, the shame, still more humiliating, of supplicating him in vain, spared the father director the scandal of seeing the authority of the church violated in the person of its minister, and the remonstrances of duty as ineffectual as the calls of nature? And me, oh, why have you not spared me this hour of agony and shame?" And she burst into a flood of tears that drowned my soul as she shed them. "Madam, what have I done that deserves the reproach of your tears? My disinclination to a monastic life is no crime." "In you it is a crime." "But how then, dear mother, were a similar choice offered to my brother, would his rejection of it be deemed a crime?" I said this almost involuntarily, and merely by way of comparison. I had no ulterior meaning, nor the least idea that one could be developed by my mother, except a reference to an unjustifiable partiality. I was undeceived when she added, in a voice that chilled my blood, "There is a great difference between you." "Yes, madame, he is your favorite." "No, I take heaven to witness, no." and she who had appeared so severe, so decisive, and so impenetrable before, uttered these words with a sincerity that penetrated to the bottom of my heart. She appeared to be appealing to heaven against the prejudices of her child. I was affected. I said, "But, madam, this difference of circumstances is inexplicable." "And would you have it explained by me?" "By anyone, madam." "By me," she repeated, not hearing me, then kissing a crucifix that hung on her bosom. "My God, the chastisement is just, and I submit to it, though inflicted by my own child. You are illegitimate," she added, turning suddenly towards me. "You are illegitimate, your brother is not, and your intrusion into your father's house is not only its disgrace, but a perpetual monitor of that crime which it aggravates without absolving." I stood speechless. "O my child," she continued, "have mercy on your mother. Has not this confession, extorted from her by her own son, been sufficient to expiate her offence?" "Go on, madame, I can bear anything now." "You must bear it, for you have forced me to this disclosure. I am of rank far inferior to your father. You were our first child. He loved me, and forgiving my weakness as proof of my devotion to him, we were married, and your brother is our lawful child. Your father, anxious for my reputation since I was united to him, agreed with me, as our marriage was private, and its date uncertain, that you should be announced as our legitimate offspring. For years your grandfather, incensed at our marriage, refused to see us, and we lived in retirement. Would that I had died there. A few days before his death he relented and sent for us. It was no time to acknowledge the imposition practiced on him. And you were introduced as the child of his son, and the heir of his honors. But from that hour I have never known a moment's peace. The lie I had dared to utter before God and the world, and to a dying parent, the injustice done to your brother, the violation of natural duties and of legal claims, the convulsions of my conscience that heavily upbraided me, not only with vice and perjury, but with sacrilege. Sacrilege? Yes, every hour you delay the assumption of the habit is a robbery of God. Before you were born, I devoted you to him, as the only expiation of my crime. While I yet bore you in my bosom without life, I dared to implore his forgiveness only on the condition of your future intercession for me as a minister of religion. I relied on your prayers before you could speak. I proposed to entrust my penitence to one who, in becoming the child of God, had atoned for my offense in making him the child of sin. In imagination I knelt already at your confessional, heard you, by the authority of the church and the commission of heaven, pronounce me forgiven. I saw you stand beside my dying bed. I felt you press the cross to my cold lips, and point to that heaven where I hoped my vow had already secured a seat for you. Before your birth, I had labored to lift you to heaven, and my recompense is, that your obstinacy threatens to drag us both into the gulf of perdition. O my child, if our prayers and intercessions are available to the delivery of the souls of our departed relatives from punishment, hear the adjuration of a living parent, who implores you not to seal her everlasting condemnation. I was unable to answer. My mother saw it, and redoubled her efforts. My son, if I thought that my kneeling at your feet would soften your obduracy, I would prostrate myself before them this moment. Oh, madam, the sight of such an unnatural humiliation ought to kill me. And yet you will not yield. The agony of this confession, the interests of my salvation and your own, nay, the preservation of my life, are of no weight with you. She perceived that these words made me tremble, and repeated, Yes, my life. Beyond the day that your inflexibility exposes me to infamy, I will not live. If you have resolution, I have resolution too, nor do I dread the result, for God will charge on your soul, not on mine, the crime an unnatural child has forced me to, and yet you will not yield. Well then, the prostration of my body is nothing to that prostration of soul you have already driven me to. I kneel to my own child for life and for salvation, and she knelt to me. I attempted to raise her. She repelled me, and exclaimed in a voice hoarse with despair, "And you will not yield?" "I do not say so." "And what then do you say? Raise me not, approach me not till you answer me." "That I will think." "Think? You must decide." "I do then, I do." "But how?" "To be whatever you would have me." As I uttered these words, my mother fell in a swoon at my feet. As I attempted to lift her up, scarce knowing if it was not a corse I held in my arms, I felt I never could have forgiven myself if she had been reduced to that situation by my refusing to comply with her last request. I was overpowered with congratulations, blessings, and embraces. I received them with trembling hands, cold lips, a rocking brain, and a heart that felt turned to stone. Everything passed before me as in a dream. I saw the pageant move on, without a thought of who was to be the victim. I returned to the convent. I felt my destiny was fixed. I had no wish to avert or arrest it. I was like one who sees an enormous engine, whose operation is to crush him to atoms, put in motion, and stupefied with horror gazes on it with a calmness that might be mistaken for that of one who was coolly analyzing the complication of its machinery, and calculating the resistless crush of its blow. I have read of a wretched Jew, who by the command of a Moorish emperor was exposed in an area to the rage of a lion, who had been purposefully kept fasting for 48 hours. The horrible roar of the famished and infuriated animal made even the executioners tremble as they fastened the rope round the body of the screaming victim. Amid hopeless struggles, supplications for mercy, and shrieks of despair, he was bound, raised, and lowered into the area. At the moment he touched the ground, he fell prostrate, stupefied, annihilated. He uttered no cry, he did not draw a breath, he did not make an effort. He fell, contracting his whole body into a ball, and lay as senseless as a lump of earth. So it fared with me. My cries and struggles were over. I had been flung into the area, and I lay there. I repeated to myself, I am to be a monk, and there the debate ended. If they commended me for the performance of my exercises, or reproved me for my deficiency, I showed neither joy nor sorrow. I said only, I am to be a monk. If they urged me to take exercise in the garden of the convent, or reproved me for my excess in walking beyond the allotted hours, I still answered, I am to be a monk. I was showed much indulgence in these wanderings. A son, the eldest son of the Duke de Monçada, taking the vows, was a glorious triumph for the ex-Jesuits, and they did not fail to make the most of it. They asked what books I would like to read. I answered, what they pleased. They saw I was fond of flowers, and vases of porcelain filled with the most exquisite produce of their garden, renewed every day, embellished my apartment. I was fond of music. That they perceived from my involuntary joining in the choir. My voice was good, and my profound melancholy gave an expression to my tones which these men, always on the watch to grasp at anything that may aggrandize them or delude their victims, assured me were like the tones of inspiration. Amid these displays of indulgence I exhibited an ingratitude totally foreign from my character. I never read the books they furnished me with. I neglected the flowers with which they filled my room, and the superb organ they introduced into my apartment I never touched, except to elicit some deep and melancholy chords from its keys. To those who urged me to employ my talents for painting and music, I still answered with the same apathetic monotony, I am to be a monk. But my brother, the love of flowers, of music, of all that can be consecrated to God is also worthy of the attention of man. You abuse the indulgence of the superior. Perhaps so. You must in gratitude to God thank him for these lovely works of his creation. The room was at this time filled with carnations and roses. You must also be grateful to him for the powers with which he has distinguished you in hymning his praises. Your voice is the richest and most powerful in the church. I don't doubt it. My brother, you answer at random. Just as I feel, but don't heed that. Will you take a turn in the garden? If you please. Or will you seek a moment's consolation from the superior?" "If you please." "But why do you speak with such apathy? Are the odor of the flowers and the consolation of your superior to be appreciated in the same breath?" "I believe so." "Why?" "Because I am to be a monk." "Nay, brother, will you never utter anything but that phrase which carries no meaning with it but that of stupefaction or delirium?" "Imagine me then stupefied, delirious, what you please. You know I must be a monk." At these words, which I suppose I uttered in a tone unlike that of the usual chaunt of monastic conversation, another interposed, and asked what I was uttering in so loud a key. "I am only saying," I replied, "that I must be a monk." "Thank God it is no worse," replied the querist. "Your contumacy must long ago have wearied the superior and the brethren. Thank God it's no worse." At these words I felt my passions resuscitated. I exclaimed, "Worse? What have I to dread? Am I not to be a monk?" From that evening, I forget when it occurred, my liberty was abridged. I was no longer suffered to walk, to converse with the boarders or novices. A separate table was spread for me in the refectory. The seats near mine were left vacant at service, yet still my cell was embellished with flowers and engravings, and exquisitely wrought toys were left on my table. I did not perceive they were treating me as a lunatic, yet certainly my foolishly reiterated expressions might have justified them in doing so. They had their own plans in concert with the director. My silence went for proof. The director came often to visit me, and the hypocritical wretches would accompany him to my cell. I was generally, for want of other occupation, attending to my flowers, or gazing at the engravings, and they would say, "You see he is as happy as he wishes to be. He wants for nothing. He is quite occupied in watching those roses." "No, I am not occupied," I returned. "It is occupation I want." Then they shrugged their shoulders, exchanged mysterious looks with the director, and I was glad when they were gone, without reflecting on the mischief their absence threatened me with. At this moment, consultation after consultation was held at the Palace de Monsada, whether I could be induced to show sufficient intellect to enable me to pronounce the vows. It seems the reverend fathers were as anxious as their old enemies, the Moors, to convert an idiot into a saint. There was now a party combined against me, that it would have required more than the might of man to resist. All was uproar from the Palace de Monsada to the convent, and back again. I was mad, contumacious, heretical, idiotical, anything, everything that could appease the jealous agony of my parents, the cupidity of the monks, or the ambition of the ex-Jesuits, who laughed at the terror of all the rest, and watched intently over their own interests. Whether I was mad or not, they cared very little. To enroll a son of the first house of Spain among their converts, or to imprison him as a madman, or to exorcise him as a demonic, was all the same to them. There was a coup de théâtre to be exhibited, and provided they played first parts, they cared little about the catastrophe. Luckily, during all this uproar of imposture, fear, falsehood, and misrepresentation, the superior remained steady. He let the tumult go on, to aggrandize his importance, but he was resolved all the time that I should have sanity enough to enable me to take the vows. I knew nothing of all this, but was astonished at being summoned to the parlour on the last eve of my novitiate. I had performed my religious exercises with regularity, had received no rebukes from the master of the novices, and was totally unprepared for the scene that awaited me. In the parlour were assembled my father, mother, the director, and some other persons whom I did not recognize. I advanced with a calm look and equal step. I believe I was as much in possession of my reason as anyone present. The superior, taking my arm, led me round the room, saying, "You see?" I interrupted him. "Sir, what is this intended for?" He answered only by putting his finger on his lips, and then desired me to exhibit my drawings. I brought them, and offered them on one knee, first to my mother, and then to my father. They were sketches of monasteries and prisons. My mother averted her eyes, and my father said, pushing them away, "I have no taste in those things." "But you are fond of music, doubtless," said the superior. "You must hear his performance." There was a small organ in the room adjacent to the parlour. My mother was not admitted there, but my father followed to listen. Involuntarily, I selected an air from the sacrifice of Jephthah. My father was affected, and bid me cease. The superior imagined this was not only a tribute to my talent, but an acknowledgment of the power of his party, and he applauded without measure or judgment. Till that moment I had never conceived I could be the object of a party in the convent. The superior was determined to make me a Jesuit, and therefore was pledged for my sanity. The monks wished for an exorcism, an auto de fe, or some such bagatelle, to diversify the dreariness of monasticism, and therefore were anxious I should be, or appear, deranged or possessed. Their pious wishes, however, failed. I had appeared when summoned, behaved with scrupulous correctness, and on the next day was appointed for my taking the vows. That next day, oh that I could describe it, but it is impossible. The profound stupefaction in which I was plunged prevented my noticing things which would have inspired the most uninterested spectator. I was so absorbed, that though I remember facts, I cannot paint the slightest trace of the feelings which they excited. During the night I slept profoundly, till I was awoke by a knock at my door. "My dear child, how are you employed?" I knew the voice of the superior, and I replied, "My father, I was sleeping." "And I was macerating myself at the foot of the altar for you, my child. The scourge is red with my blood." I returned no answer, for I felt the maceration was better merited by the betrayer than the betrayed. Yet I was mistaken, for in fact the superior felt some compunction, and had undergone this penance on account of my repugnance and alienation of mind more than for his own offences. But oh, how false is a treaty made with God, which we ratify with our own blood, when he has declared there is but one sacrifice he will accept, even that of the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Twice in the night I was thus disturbed, and twice answered in the same language. The superior, I make no doubt, was sincere. He thought he was doing all for God, and his bleeding shoulders testified his zeal. But I was in such a state of mental ossification that I neither felt, heard, or understood. And when he knocked a second and third time at the door of my cell to announce the severity of his macerations, and the efficacy of his intercessions with God, I answered, "Are not criminals allowed to sleep the night before their execution?" At hearing these words, which must have made him shudder, the superior fell prostrate before the door of my cell, and I turned to sleep again. But I could hear the voices of the monks as they raised the superior, and bore him to his cell. They said, "He is incorrigible. You humiliate yourself in vain. When he is ours, you shall see him a different being. He shall then prostrate himself before you." I heard this and slept on. The morning came. I knew what it would bring. I dramatized the whole scene in my mind. I imagined I witnessed the tears of my parents, the sympathy of the congregation. I thought I saw the hands of the priests tremble as they tossed the incense, and even the acolytes shiver as they held their robes. Suddenly my mind changed. I felt, what was it I felt? A union of malignity, despair, and power, the most formidable. Lightning seemed flashing from my eyes as I reflected. I might make the sacrificers and the sacrificed change places in one moment. I might blast my mother as she stood, by a word. I might break my father's heart by a single sentence. I might scatter more desolation around me than it was apparently possible for human vice, human power, or human malignity, more potent than both, to cause to its most abject victim. Yes, on that morning I felt within myself the struggles of nature, feeling, compunction, pride, malevolence, and despair. The former I had brought with me, the latter had been all acquired in the convent. I said to those who attended me that morning, "You are arraying me for a victim, but I can turn the executioners into the victims if I please," and I laughed. The laugh terrified those who were about me. They retreated. They represented my state to the superior. He came to my apartment. The whole convent was by this time alarmed. Their credit was at stake. The preparations had all been made. The whole world was determined I was to be a monk, mad or not. End of chapter 5, part 2.